Thank you. Mr. Gallego is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. I want to start by offering my thoughts to the people of Ukraine as Russia continues to launch an unprovoked and wholly unjustifiable invasion in Ukraine. I want to make myself very clear that the United States stands with Ukraine. Champions of freedom and democracy around the world stand with Ukraine, and Russia will not go unpunished as the Biden administration is demonstrating. Ms. Karlin, Dr. Karlin, I apologize. Thank you for your testimony. In your written remarks, you described the way the Department approaches security cooperation with states on Russia's and China's periphery differs from how it's employed elsewhere. One of my proudest accomplishments in Congress was leading the effort last year to authorize the Baltic Security Initiative, a security cooperation program providing targeted support to Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. As Russia continues to directly threaten European security, how do you see security cooperation with the Baltic states going forward? What more do you think the Department can and should do through security cooperation vehicles to support our most vulnerable NATO allies at this time of heightened tensions?
Thank you very much, Congressman. We absolutely want to ensure that our security cooperation programs are tailored to the needs of that country and also to how and in what ways we might want that country to think about the use of its military. And those frontline partners, whether in Europe or in Asia, are going to inevitably have different needs and different requirements. We are in very consistent, deep talks with the Baltic states to ensure that they're getting the support that they need. And what is, I think, just so notable about this time period is not just the security cooperation kind of discreetly, but more broadly, the force posture changes that we've seen as well, where we're seeing NATO members really left and right putting their troops in one another's territory. So I think those conversations have gone very smoothly to date. That is not least, I think, because of the efforts that you have made in ensuring that they are getting the prioritized assistance. And over these coming weeks and months, I think it'll be important that we take this concept further to ensure that they are receiving what they need. I think, just to take those countries as examples, we see capacity, we see capability, we see political will, we see appropriate context. We see countries that follow the rule of law and human rights. So a lot of the criteria that we think about, they really do follow in spades. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Karlin, I believe it's essential that we have greater flexibility in providing this crucial support to our Baltic allies. As you know, Section 333 of the Title 10 U.S. Code is the Department's primary authority for training and equipping to build partner capacity. What is your assessment of 333? Are there further steps that the Department should take to make the best use of it?
Thank you very much, Congressman. And my colleague may want to add on this topic as well. But I would say the reforms that Congress put in the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act really brought together this patchwork of authorities. They enabled greater focus on collaboration between state and DoD, and also this push on assessment, monitoring, and evaluation. I think we're seeing that flexibility on the whole is largely in a good place. To the extent that it is possible, however, to get funding that lasts beyond 1 year. Those longer-term programs, what's nice about that is we can design them more holistically. We can ensure that temporally there's enough bandwidth to execute them on time. Thank you.
Congressman, thank you for raising the Baltics, and thank you for the hard work that you and many others have done. And I do think the Baltic Security Initiative has been incredibly important in increasing the funding that those countries receive. I also think it's notable that those countries often work together as they look to band together, literally, to increase their security. And I would also, it would be remiss of me not to mention the unbelievable support they have also provided to Ukraine at this time. And I think we all owe them thanks for that. On your second question, in terms of security cooperation and security assistance at large, I echo Dr. Karlin that we believe that the way that we work together is incredibly important to both the Department of Defense and the Department of State. I would also add on the State Department side, a lot of our funding is earmarked, and so we would look for additional flexibility, particularly to be able to respond to situations exactly like we find ourselves in Ukraine, so that we can both help continue to support Ukraine, but also the Eastern Flank states, including the Baltics, moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Gates is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our partnerships have value, but they also have costs, Dr. Karlin. Saudi Arabia is a country that still tolerates anti-Semitic madrasas. They throw gay people off of buildings. They murder their critics. The Saudi consulate in LA gave material support to 9/11 hijackers who were predominantly Saudi. And we trained some of their pilots in my community in Pensacola. And one of the people we were training killed 3 of my constituents because he was radicalized by al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula. What comfort can I give my constituents that the department is doing everything possible and putting pressure on our partners to ensure they're doing everything possible so that the people involved in our training programs don't pose a threat to our force?
Thank you very much, Congressman. I'll focus just on the part of who we train, and Assistant Secretary Lewis may want to give the broader picture. We have a whole lot of very serious vetting procedures in place to ensure that the individuals, the units we're working with are following the rule of law, are upholding human rights. And when we see something is not happening as it should, we immediately pause and study so that we can understand what's going on and if we have concerns about our assistance and how it is being employed.
Ms. Lewis, do we have confidence that that process that failed, in this particular case in Pensacola has been improved upon since then?
Yes, and let me take a bit of a step back. First of all, to say I appreciate you raising the question, and I know how important this is to both you and the entire community, so thank you for raising it. And I know that both the State Department and the Department of Defense are always committed to doing everything we can to make sure that we're protecting our communities here at home. But yes, we have worked hand in glove with the Department of Defense to improve and will continue to do so, vetting in all of our programs. I think one of the key pieces that we look at is making sure that these programs are there to strengthen and deepen our relationships with these countries, and at the same time that they do make sure that we have the right people coming to them. So happy to continue.
Yeah, I would
to
greatly
coordinate
appreciate, for the record, if there's a way for either of you to extend those remarks on specific ways that there might have been improvements subsequent to that terrorist attack in my community. And speaking of less than fully helpful Gulf monarchies, Ms. Lewis, what is the administration's reaction to the UAE abstaining in the Security Council? They lobbied so hard to get the seat on the Security Council, and here, this highly consequential conflict, they seem to be less than entirely cooperative with our position.
Well, and I appreciate the question, and I think that as we look at the relationship with the UAE, we have a robust relationship with them. To just take a step back, as you know, we have, UAE has recently faced threats from the Houthis, and we've been supporting them. Exactly.
Why won't they help us?
I think we are having a robust conversation with them, asking them to continue to work with us in this situation on Ukraine.
Is the administration disappointed with the abstention?
I think the administration has asked all of our friends and partners and allies to support us.
Yeah, but this is a specific one because, like you say, we've helped them with the Houthis, we've sold them a bunch of stuff, the chairman wants to accelerate the delivery of F-35s to them, and I'm just wondering, are we disappointed that they abstained?
I think we have concerns about that, and we are working with them and talking to them about that moving forward.
Are you confident in a change in position in the UAE, given that we're now seeing reports that Putin is targeting civilians in Kyiv?
I'm not comfortable speaking for another country and what they may or may not do, but I think you're raising legitimate questions about moving forward. I know that there, while we've been here, I think there are votes potentially or discussions happening right now in the United Nations, and I will continue.
Like, what's the time frame, that the window of time that the State Department evaluates as like the essential window to get the UAE off the sidelines, given their position on the Security Council? Do you think that this has to happen in the next week for it to be effective, or do you think we can have sort of a long, drawn-out dance of the veils with the Emiratis?
I think that as we look at this relationship with the Emiratis, as we do with all of our relationships with our partners, our allies, and our friends, we have to both be able to work together on the critical security issues that we share and also raise concerns when we do have them.
Final point. Do you think a reason they abstained is because they haven't gotten the MQ-9s and the F-35s yet?
In my view, we have worked very closely with them and are continuing those conversations on the MQ-9.
But do you think that's a factor in the abstention?
I'm not able to speak for another country on their thinking, but I do know we continue to be committed on both the MQ-9s and the F-35s.
Maybe we shouldn't be. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Carbajal is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary Lewis and Secretary Karlin, for being here. This hearing on the importance of allies and partners is coming at a critical time. The strength and resolve of our alliances and relationships are being tested more than they have been in decades. I want to thank President Biden and his administration for the commitment to address the Russian invasion of Ukraine in close coordination and collaboration with not only NATO allies, but partners across the world. While the tragic situation in Ukraine is far from over, we have seen a great value of being unified economically, diplomatically, and militarily. A go-at-it-alone strategy would be ineffective. My thoughts are with the Ukrainian people and stand in solidarity with Ukraine's effort to repel Putin's invasion. Secretary Karlin, when we discuss U.S. security assistance provided to our allies and partners, often it focuses on the sale and export of defense articles. However, the tangible assistance is limited if the receiving nation doesn't have the institutional knowledge and personnel ready to fully operate and maintain the assets. How does the partner nation's ability to maintain U.S.-provided security assistance factor into the scope of capabilities provided? What have you found most effective at improving operational and maintenance capabilities with partner nations?
Thank you very much, Congressman, and I couldn't agree more with your initial comments about the unity that we have seen and how crucial that has been for effectiveness. This issue of maintaining and sustaining equipment that is given to allies and partners is crucial. We have a really robust program in place, an end-use monitoring program, to ensure that the material that we have given our allies and partners is being accounted for so that the right folks have that material. More broadly, we spend a lot of time working with them on the procedures needed for sustainment. What we don't want is for them to have a situation where they have some sort of platform or asset, but they haven't really taken good care of it, and therefore are not ready and able to use it. So it's crucial. I would also say, frankly, it's one of the top points that we emphasize in the utility of this partnership. We don't want them to have an airfield full of planes without spare parts that don't fly. That's not in their interest. It's not in our interest at the end of the day. So it really is crucial to how we approach security cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Karlin. Secretary Lewis, while I know each partner nation has unique political dynamics and security needs, is there a particular tool or capability that the U.S. provided or provides to partner allies through security assistance programs, in addition to what was just mentioned, through security assistance programs that has been most effective at advancing the State Department's foreign policy objectives?
Well, and thank you for that question. I actually think one of the amazing things about our cooperation is that we really do have a range of tools that I think working together with any given country can move our foreign policy objectives forward. So we have arms transfers, which I think is what people talk about the most frequently, where we're providing other countries with the capabilities that they need and that match our foreign policy goals. We also have other programs like international military education and training programs, where we really bring together and bring into our training programs the senior military leadership and future leaders that I think is incredibly important. I have been focused on and really am delving into the question of security sector governance. So this is the concept of how can we work not only to provide capabilities, but also to increase the effectiveness of, for example, ministries of defense? How can we provide training so that when countries are procuring, the system is designed to make sure there isn't corruption, that when they're designing their training programs, that they're taking a look at things like human rights, international law. All of these tools have to come together And I would also be remiss to mention that it's not only our security cooperation and security assistance, but we have to work hand in glove with our diplomacy, but also with our colleagues at the U.S. Agency for International Development, as they also work on things like writ large rule of law in a country that then feeds into our work. And so I look forward to working with you and your staff as we continue to address these important issues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm out of time. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Bacon is recognized.
Thank you,
for
Mr.
5
Chairman.
minutes.
Thank you both for being here today. What's going on in Ukraine has just been heartbreaking. See what's happened to the Ukrainian citizens. Today we're seeing reports of mass murders, indiscriminate killing, really war crimes. And my perception of what has happened is the security order has changed. It's probably going to be changed for decades. What Putin is really saying is might makes right. I'm a bully. You can't stop me. And the only country that can do that is America, standing up with our allies. If only had really one feedback, constructive criticism of the administration leading up to this, I think we should have sold or given Ukraine more advanced air defense and anti-shipping capabilities. They could have surely have used that this past week. And then once the invasion occurred, I thought the sanctions were a little slow, but now I think we're in a pretty darn good spot, except for I would like to see us also go after energy. The fact that America is going to be giving Russia today $70 million to purchase oil, their oil exports to us, and we're going to do that every single day. It's propping up their economy. It's propping up their ability to wage war. So I hope we take on the energy exports of Russia as well. I'm also the co-chair of the Baltic Security Caucus. I know my colleague talked about this briefly, but the number one feedback we do hear from them is they would like to have U.S. troops permanently assigned in the Baltics for deterrence. Have we considered that? Is that an option from your perspective? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman, and I couldn't agree more with you on your diagnosis of the situation that we are seeing around Ukraine. I think it is indeed heartbreaking, and I think we will feel and see the effects of it for years to come. That actually does get to the Baltic security piece. Thank you for your leadership on that one. As you may know, Secretary Austin has made multiple trips, in fact, to the Baltics in just over the last few months, in fact. When we're looking at our permanent posture in countries, we're really trying to take into account a wide variety of criteria. And I think given the changes that we have seen in the security environment right now, it's incumbent on us to step back and look at how things have changed. So when Secretary Austin announced the global posture review results last fall, I think we had seen our posture in Europe was about right, and now we need to step back and see what's changed and what does that look like, whether that's rotational, whether that's permanent, whether it's different types of units or capabilities. Thank you.
Just to add, and first of all, I really want to thank you for your remarks. I do think it is heartbreaking what's happening, and I think the security order has changed, and that we all need to come together at this incredible moment in history. And again, watching the Ukrainians fight for their country has truly been inspirational, I think, for all of us. On your question on the Baltic security, as I mentioned before, they have also been extraordinary.
They've led.
Really, and they probably understand the threat better than most, given the map. As I mentioned before, we really appreciate the congressional leadership on this front. I think the Baltic Security Initiative has allowed us to provide additional funding to them. I also think one of their strengths is that they work together as they look at capabilities moving forward, and we are going to continue to work with them on that from the State Department side of the House.
We may want to consider putting air defense units, U.S. run, whether it's longer range air defense or variety, because I think you got to protect your long range air defense with short range. But we may be able to put some air defense capabilities there with U.S. forces, but having a U.S. flag there, a permanent one, is a deterrence. The Russians will know they're not just going into the Baltics. Of course, they're a NATO country, but they are attacking U.S. forces when they do so, and I think it would have a reassuring effect for the Baltics, who are very small, as you know, about 5 million people. So. My second question, and there's only about a minute left, is Taiwan. What can we be doing now with Taiwan, weapons-wise, to strengthen deterrence? What kind of capabilities can we be giving them?
Thank you, Congressman. I'll briefly say, as I think you know, we've done about $18 billion in assistance to them since 2017. Right now, we're working very closely in line with the Taiwan Relations Act to ensure that they're getting the asymmetric capabilities that they need,
Right.
that are really tailored to the threat that they face, a threat that, as we know, and as the Chinese keep trying to remind us, is growing each day. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, anti-shipping and anti-air capabilities seem to be the coin of the realm for what the Taiwanese would need as well. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Keating is recognized for 5 minutes, and he's virtual. Bill? Mr. Keating? He does not appear to be responding. Mr. Keating? All right. Mr. Crow is recognized while we try to get a hold of Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both of you for coming. This has been a very productive and illuminating discussion, and I appreciate your approach to these things. To kind of expand the discussion out a little bit, you know, we have these various alliances in different forms and structures. The EU appears to be stepping up and looking more seriously at taking on a more military role, which of course has been a subject of discussion for some time. Obviously, we have NATO, we have the Quad, we have AUKUS, we have these formal and less formal relationships. What do we need in Asia, in Indo-PACOM, and do we need something more formal for those that don't fall within Quad, don't fall within AUKUS, to engage them more substantively?
Thank you very much, Congressman. And just to tie to your first piece on the EU, I think what we've seen them doing is pretty notable vis-a-vis Ukraine. And to the extent we can ever get more European capacity and capability, that is a good thing wherever it is. On the Indo-Pacific, I think two pieces really stand out, outside of AUKUS, of course. One is how we can better knit together Southeast Asia. A lot of that work, obviously, ASEAN is really important in that. And I would say we're seeing with our Southeast Asian partners increasing concern about the changing threat picture. The other piece is that Quad in Asia, so how we're better able to bring together those countries. We have these really strong bilateral alliances there, as you know. Any effort we can bring to get them all to cooperate in a multilateral fashion is better. And I think I'm optimistic that when we are sitting here 5 years from now, we'll have a really positive story to paint on the progress of these alliances, and in particular on the investments of a lot of these countries in their militaries, which is on the whole on a really positive trajectory.
Thank you. And Ms. Lewis, I had a slightly different question for you that I wanted you to lead on. And Dr. Karlin spoke about this earlier, but a critical part of our value proposition here and what really differentiates us is the fact that we do look at anti-corruption, we tie in humanitarian aid, foreign aid, which really, I think, is a huge value added. Yet that remains very compartmented, right, and very siloed within the U.S. government. It's very slow. It's not always tied together. Do we need different authorities? Do we need to restructure the way State Department and DoD work together with USAID and others to be fast, to be nimble, and to really bring that value added in the way that we need to in the 21st century?
Well, thank you for that question, because I think it gives us an opportunity to talk about the future and where we want to go. I think at this point and in this moment, what we need to do is to continue the good work we're doing and expand on it. And I mentioned security sector governance a few minutes ago, and I think this is actually a very good example of where the different pieces of the government come together, and it really hits on the points that you're talking about. So if we're working in a country, we want to be able to be sure that, for example, that as USAID is working on with ministries of defense on things like rule of law, that concurrently we are also in our training working with the Ministry of Defense on making sure that there's training provided on things like international law, the law of war, preventing civilian casualties, human rights. And then at the same time, as we do our trainings through our International Military Education and Training Program, that those are being reinforced as we deepen and strengthen our ties. So for me, it isn't an authorities question. It's really, are we doing that effective coordination, working with each other? I think right now the coordination is good. We can always continue to improve it, and would be happy to continue this conversation with you.
So I guess I appreciate what you said about the authorities, right? The authorities exist, you can do it, but as we all know, culture, parochialism within the executive branch, other issues prevent that from happening. So I guess for the record, we're running low on time here, but it would be really good for us to know as legislators whether there are things that we can proactively do that would help you all with that mindset shift, that cultural shift that's really necessary to achieve that, because this is like a huge cruise ship, right? And turning it around or changing the direction, obviously very hard for you all. We want to be a partner in that. We want to help you. And if there's things that we can do proactively and legislatively or from an appropriations perspective to accomplish that, I know there's a bunch of us who'd be very interested in helping. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Moore is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member. I join the chorus of my colleagues emphasizing the relevance and importance of this critical hearing. Thank you for being here. Our NATO alliance faces the gravest geopolitical crisis in nearly 2 decades. I don't think I'm overstating that. China continually bullies neighbors on the Indo-Pacific. Our adversaries' nefarious activities spread beyond their borders as Russia and China seek to expand influence both here and at home and abroad. Right now, more than ever, the United States must aggressively initiate, cultivate, and expand partnerships and alliances. It's crucial to both of your roles and the DoD to be able to do that. With very few exceptions, when given the choice, potential allies will choose the United States as their preferred partner over peer competition. Having just recently returned from Israel, that's never more apparent than their appreciation and willingness to engage in partnerships with us. Many allies have even had a dialogue, and they've voiced a desire to purchase more equipment and expressed frustration at how long the process takes. So a question for either or both of you to respond. Beyond the reforms mandated by the FY17 NDAA, how can we accelerate security assistance to qualified nations considering our new geopolitical reality?
Congressman, thank you for the question. And first of all, I'd like to say I fully agree with what you started with at the moment that we're in time, and the importance of focusing both on Russia and China and our alliances, that we need to strengthen and deepen them as we work on that. In terms of your question on speeding up the process, really, I look at this as a four-legged stool. We usually say three-legged, but in this case, four-legged stool.
Great.
We start working with our partners at the Department of Defense, who really have to engage in a complicated technical process with the countries and the companies involved, if there are companies involved, on the exact details and exactly what capabilities this partner may need. And that does take some time. It is important work. These are very sophisticated systems that we are providing to other countries. Then it comes to the State Department, where we provide a review from a foreign policy perspective, which generally we're able to move relatively quickly depending on the challenges. And then we come to Congress, and you also are a partner in the moving these forward. And then finally, we have the companies that are producing the defense articles. Excuse me. I will say that one challenge we're facing right now is that, unfortunately, due to COVID, a number of our countries are facing challenges on production timelines. I know that's something that I have been in regular conversations with them about as they're trying to improve that and get these incredibly important capabilities out to our partners, allies, and friends. But that is something we also need to continue to work on in terms of shortening the time frame and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman. I absolutely concur with all of Assistant Secretary Lewis's great points in terms of our efforts to try to speed this up. I think in doing so, it's also really important that we make sure we're not just taking kind of an Excel spreadsheet approach to our assistance, and in particular, that we are taking a meaningful effort to understand What impact are our programs having? Are they meeting the objectives, operational and or strategic, that we have outlined? So we're really trying hard to measure that, and that is not least thanks to Congress putting it into the 2017 NDA that you had cited, sir.
That parlays really well into my next question. The question is, to what extent do you feel our approach has met its intended goal, and particularly about counterterrorism? The DoD made a decision to expand beyond legacy security assistance authorities like foreign military sales and pursue comprehensive partnerships to train and equip foreign partners. To what extent do you feel these have been effective? Is there an area of improvement here?
Thank you very much. You're absolutely right that we have really seen a shift, particularly in the post 9/11 era, in how we have thought about security assistance. And on the whole, I think a lot of these efforts have been really quite effective, where we have seen a number of our allies and partners help deal with terrorist threats around the world, and doing so in appropriate ways, doing so in ways that are upholding the rule of law and following human rights. So I think that has been an important innovation, as one might call it, in our approach to security assistance. And I think we've also been able to see, particularly as, say, the ISIS threat metastasizes across Africa, it's been important that these relationships continue to evolve, so that we're working with partners to ensure we're all understanding how the threat network is changing and how we can most effectively continue to get after it, because unfortunately, it does not appear that—
Gentleman's time has expired. I apologize. Thank you. Mr. Keating, we're going to give you one more shot. You with us? I see that smile.
Thank you.
You are recognized for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to thank the witnesses for their work and coordination with our allies and partners, which brings me to an important question, I think. What is the extent of your coordination and cooperation in regard to trade and other agencies, particularly in the areas of the supply chain? We're seeing now in Russia with export controls, we will see the devastating effect it will have not only on their economy as a whole, but also on their security and their military. And at the same time, we've seen with the pandemic the effects of supply chain shortages to our country. So with your two departments, are we also coordinating on issues of trade and the supply chain? Could you comment on the extent to which you're doing that?
Thank you for that question. And actually, this just came up in the previous question. And I think you're right that we really are at a unique time, both in terms of the question of the supply chain due to COVID, but then also the issues that you raised that we're going to see related to the Russia context. We have been in close contact, particularly with the companies that we work very, very closely with on their supply chain issues as it relates to COVID. As I'm sure you're aware, defense articles are incredibly complicated, sophisticated, and it takes a lot of work to produce them, and we need to work closely with the supply chain to make sure that that's working effectively. So the short answer to your question is yes, we have been in touch with the companies. Obviously, we're in touch with the other departments when relevant to see if there's anything they can do to be helpful. I do think this is going to continue to be an ongoing challenge, even as the companies work hard to get the situation moving more quickly.
Yeah, I think are you doing anything with the Commerce Department at all in that regard? Because I see the need to integrate this more, because our weapons are relying on semiconductors, chips, other technological materials. So without those kind of securities, it poses a great threat to our assets. So are you in contact with those agencies directly, or would you anticipate making that more meaningful in the future?
I know that the State Department is regularly in contact with the Department of Commerce on a whole range of issues, including, depending where they fall, weapon sales, and we will continue to do so. I think you raise a very important issue, and we will make sure that we continue to coordinate with them and even expand that coordination.
Lastly, too, I just like on the record, given other comments I've heard in the last few days from members of Congress, one interruption to the supply chain, one part of our security, is dealing with the climate change issue, increased instability, the effects of migration, the infrastructure damage. Look at Tyndall Air Force and the devastating damage there in Florida, as well as Camp Lejeune, the threats to bomb the Marshall Islands. I could go all around the world with this. Can you just comment on the importance of partnering with our allies and friends on the issue of climate change? It is indeed a security issue. Would you comment on that?
Thank you very much, Congressman. It is absolutely one that we are watching closely, whether it is seeing how climate change is affecting the security environment for our allies or our partners or our competitors, but also, as you're noting in citing Tyndall Air Force Base, it also affects our own forces in particular and their ability to maneuver. So it is something we look at closely and that we regularly engage in discussions with our closest allies and partners. Thank you.
I mean, lastly, it's quite obvious we can't do this alone, an issue like that, and that's indeed should be a priority for our engagement with our allies and partners. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back with time left.
Thank you very much. Mr. Green is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate you putting this hearing together and for the opportunity to discuss alliances and partnerships around the world. Given the incredible events, heinous events, the past week unfolding in Ukraine, I'm proud to be joining with my colleagues to work on developing our response to Vladimir Putin's naked greed and aggression. In order to do that, though, America must have clear and united response to this invasion of a sister democracy. During my recent visit to Ukraine and discussion with Polish and Baltic allies at NATO headquarters en route to Kyiv, military and civilian leaders alike directly linked a lack of American leadership in Afghanistan to Putin's misguided attempt to test the West's resolve. And I'll quote one of those NATO representatives who said, "We are where we are today because of weakness in August." We all knew what he meant. American leadership is indispensable. It's crystal clear. President Biden's failure to send timely lethal aid in the past year, though, has been a continuation of that weakness. American leadership is essential, leading and engaging with our partners around the world. The stair-stepped approach to sanctions implementation has only emboldened Putin. It's time for genuine resolve. America cannot tolerate an iron curtain falling upon the people of Eastern Europe for a second time in our living memory. The torch of freedom that burned so brightly under American, British, and NATO leadership just 4 decades ago must not be allowed to go out. We must join the Ukrainian people in our boldness, our determination to face down any threat to our freedoms and interests around the world. We must reclaim our heritage of standing firm with friends against tyranny. We must lead. Vladimir Putin thought he was claiming the mantle of Peter the Great and rebuilding a Russian empire, but as the Ukrainian people have shown him to be, he is nothing more than a petty tyrant. His attempts to conquer and subjugate the proud people of Ukraine, divide the West, and supplant American leadership around the world have failed. From the streets of Kyiv to the smallest villages in Ukraine, patriots are standing up against this invasion. NATO and our freedom-loving partners around the globe are more united than in decades, and the world is rejecting the leadership of autocrats in Russia and China. I look forward to hearing more from you guys as we further support and add our cooperation in historic alliances in NATO and develop stronger bonds of friendship with our allies in the Western Hemisphere and Indo-Pacific, such as India, to prevent any further escalations from the tyrants plaguing our world. My first question is about specifically India, and what are we doing to help persuade India regarding the S-400 and parts that they're purchasing for the aircraft they bought from Russia, specifically?
First, I really want to thank you, I think, for your comments on Ukraine, and particularly recognizing the fight that the Ukrainians are literally carrying out as we speak.
Pretty awesome.
It is extraordinary, and I think also what you mentioned about the world more united than we've seen in decades, and I think that is a tribute to our allies and partners, and frankly, to the Ukrainians themselves.
Yep.
But to get to your more specific question, we have been working closely with India, as you know, had regular conversations about them with them about the Russian purchases, and we are looking to create a whole relationship with them where they are looking towards us as they move forward with additional purchases. And I think as we also look at things like the Quad and the deepening relationships that we're having there, that will help move us forward with them. I really believe that this, particularly as they see the threat from China right now, I think it has really helped move them forward in understanding the need to shift this relationship.
If I could jump in there, though, I have a particular interest in India just because I think the geopolitics of the world, they're just so incredibly important. I appreciate Secretary Blinken, especially in the efforts he's made with the Quad. But I'm seeing posts, I follow political leaders in India, and I'm seeing posts like, "Can we trust America? Look what they did in Afghanistan." These are elected officials in India's government. So, I mean, what options are we giving them for alternatives to Russian stuff? And how are we communicating to them that we're reliable?
Thank you very much, Congressman. It's an issue that, like you, I think is a real priority. In fact, about 2 decades ago, my first Pentagon job was being the India desk officer under President Bush. And that's when we really shifted to this dramatically different relationship, which, as you know, was geostrategically important and has...
and I apologize. We're going to have to cut it off there. Gentleman's time has expired.
Perhaps in writing, then.
I'd be delighted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Slotkin is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. And for those who don't know, happy Punchki Day. That's a big holiday in Michigan. I have punchkis over here for anyone who wants them. It's like a Polish jelly donut that we all celebrate with. Okay, they're over here, guys. Okay, so I guess, you know, what is going on between Russia and Ukraine is so incredibly unbelievable to watch, both the Russian decision and calculus to do this, the Ukrainian resistance, which is formidable, and then the way that it has galvanized the international community. And I will say that over multiple administrations, Democrat and Republican, we have tried to minimize, basically since the Cold War, friction with Putin and with Russia in the hopes that it wouldn't exacerbate a problem, it wouldn't inspire retribution for the Russians. And I guess I just feel like that era is over, that all of our attempts to minimize friction didn't mean anything. And he went ahead and made this move. And I think it's a sea change for how both the Defense Department and the State Department should think about our presence in Europe, our assistance to Europe. So I guess I just want to clarify a couple of things. What is the official administration position on letting in countries like Kosovo, Bosnia, potentially Georgia, Finland, and Sweden into NATO? Very quickly.
Thank you. Couldn't agree more, Congresswoman, that we're in a different ballgame right now, and we all need to step back and assess that. I would say regarding new members of NATO, there's not kind of an effort to fast-track folks, but there is an effort to work with those who are interested and who meet the necessary requirements.
Right, I know, but that's been our process before. And I would offer that if the answers that we're getting, and I say this as someone who was in your exact positions testifying in front of this committee in 2014 when they put little green men into eastern Ukraine, if we are using the same metrics and same assessments from before this conflict as we will be afterwards, then we're missing the moment here. And I'd ask you to come back to this committee maybe in another month's time and just tell us how you've changed your thinking. And I would strongly advocate that we seriously consider a different approach to letting folks into NATO and not slow roll those who we're just trying to drag out, and I've done it myself. Number two, the buildup in the Baltics. Couldn't agree more with my colleagues who have talked about putting more force in right now. And I guess I would just make that as a point as opposed to a question, that we need to be doing more, and obviously China is watching everything that we do. But I know we're right in the middle of this. It's still a very fresh and new event, but for any administration to go through this, we have to completely reevaluate deterrence and how we reestablish it. And I'd ask that we have folks come back to the committee to present on that. On the assistance, we get really confusing messages about what is being provided and when by not just us, but also our allies. We were told in a briefing yesterday that EU members were providing aircraft. Now we're seeing online that no one's providing aircraft. If you all could come up with a routine where we would get maybe a regular update, just something that a staffer could put together so we know what's true and what's not true, and the final mile of making sure that assistance gets in the hands of the Ukrainians, not just shipped and it sits somewhere, but it gets there, because we know that's going to be more complicated. I guess lastly, I was wondering if someone could give us your sense of how this plays out in Ukraine over the next week and a half. I know that's not your specialty, but we're in the middle of this crisis. People are watching. Can you tell us what you think is going to happen? We heard it privately, but I'd like to say publicly, hear publicly, what the Defense Department thinks is going to happen over the next week and a half.
Thank you, and we can absolutely look at getting you those materials that you requested on the aid. I would just say our European allies are doing so much that folks are working on keeping track of it. So thank you for that. Over this next week and a half, I think what we have seen is the Ukrainian military is fighting so incredibly hard. I mean, the political will they have demonstrated is extraordinary, and I think that we have seen it has been a lot more and a lot harder than Putin and his military would have expected. I would continue to expect that they will do all they can. Assistance, as you know, is flowing to them, and I think that they will try to continue to push back this invasion to the extent possible. Unfortunately, as you probably saw this morning in particular, we've seen that the Russian military is prioritizing just increasingly horrific approaches, in particular indiscriminate bombing.
I would just say you have an absolutely unique moment where the U.S. Congress has bipartisan agreement on giving you what you need, and we're not getting an ask. Ask us for things, and we will
I'm sorry,
help.
the gentlelady's time has expired, and I think that is a very reasonable request to get that very focused ask for what it is you want us to do. Mr. Lamborn is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right now, there is sitting in the docket here in our House business a $6.5 billion aid package for Ukraine. $2.5 billion of that is humanitarian. And yet, we're not doing anything. What I've heard is that we're going to wait a week and deal with it in a week from now. In the next week, aren't there civilians who are going to be dying in Ukraine? Aren't there soldiers who are taking up arms who are going to die? Isn't there property that's going to be destroyed? Isn't there going to be hunger in Ukraine? Why in the world can we wait a week to deal with this?
Thank you very much, Congressman. In particular, I would say that we've been pushing a lot of assistance to Ukraine and to its military, and are looking very closely at the humanitarian situation in particular. And we look forward to cooperating as much as possible over these coming days and weeks on this situation.
Ms. Slotkin is exactly right. There's bipartisan support. We could have passed this last night on a voice vote. It's wrong for us to wait a week to do this. Do you have any influence? Can you talk to anybody and say, let's bring this up today, let's get this going? There are people dying in Ukraine right now. There's a 40-mile convoy of Russian tanks and armor going to Kiev.
Congressman, I think you raise a very important point about the urgency of the current situation. And while obviously I can't comment on specific legislation or timing here, I can tell you that at the State Department and the Defense Department, we are committed to moving forward expeditiously. As you may know, over the past year, we've provided $1 billion of assistance to Ukraine on the security side, additional on the humanitarian side. Just over the past 6 months, we've used 3 presidential drawdown authorities, which is this ability that we have to move items from the Defense Department to Ukraine, including the largest package ever in the history of the United States, which is the most recent one we did of $350 million. And we will continue to do so.
Well, I would like you both to go and back and tell people at the White House that they need to do something to get our leadership off the dime. They're doing nothing here in the House. We could be sending this money to Ukraine, and people are literally dying and will die in the next week needlessly. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, back to you.
Thank you. I will say, lest someone gets the wrong idea, well, certainly, the House can pass what's passed. There is a ton of money that is flowing out of the United States of America right now to help the people of Ukraine. Fortunately, as we all know, it does not require congressional action to do all of that. In fact, part of the brief yesterday was the administration explaining that they were using executive action to send weapons and to send humanitarian aid to the Ukraine. So it is completely wrong to say that we're doing nothing. I mean, it's not even in the neighborhood of being true. We're doing a lot.
Mr. Chairman, no one said we're doing nothing.
Yes, sir. I thought that's exactly what you said just a second ago.
No, I said there's a $6.5 billion package that we're doing nothing on, and we could be passing it.
Reclaiming my time, and you did at one point said we're sitting here doing nothing. You were referring to Congress. I grant that. But Congress is part of the whole large picture here, and we have given money to the administration. They are doing that. Now, we can look at it and see, are there things that the administration can't do on the executive side that requires us to then approve more money? And I think that's perfectly fine. And we need to look at that and do that. But I just want to make perfectly clear to anyone watching this, the United States government writ large in the last couple of weeks is sending money, is sending weapons, is sending arms. You were in the brief yesterday when you heard that. So let's be clear on that is happening. And now, Congress needs to look at whether or not we need to send more money, whether or not we need to give them authority to do that. And that's perhaps why we're waiting to make sure that we do this right. But while we're waiting to pass congressional legislation, it is not the case that nothing is happening. It is happening. If nothing was happening, then I would be right there with you, say we got to pass it yesterday. It's a matter of combining those things. I just want to make sure we understand that. Who's next? Ms. Sherrill is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lewis, as the chairman said at the opening of this, we do security and defense aid better than anyone in the world here in the United States. And so what I'm wondering is, where do we stand on development aid? Not everybody wants a new F-18. Some states want a new road or bridge, and we've really seen China capitalize on that. And as Dr. Karlin stated, they've done that in a way that we are really diametrically opposed to. So if the prevalence, if the pervasive nature of Chinese influence and infrastructure is anything to go by, we seem to be losing ground in countries across the world, including not just across Africa, but in Europe and South America, to China. What can we do specifically to begin to rectify this?
Well, thank you very much for the question. And I think the question of how we compete with China across the world is really at top of mind. And I also want to commend you, because I think you're raising, it's not just in the region, it's how we're competing across the world. So while my piece of the State Department handles the security assistance, which is what you mentioned, in terms of providing arms transfers and security assistance to the ministries of defense and training as well, we do work hand in glove with USAID and other pieces of the State Department, which are focused closely on the issues that you raise. And I think, as you point out, China has really focused in their Belt and Road Initiative on things like building infrastructure. I would note that countries often end up in a terrible debt cycle from that, which is truly disturbing and not in their long-term interest or, frankly, in the interest of our foreign policy. So I think we have to, from my piece of the State Department, we have to work together. And one of the things that I've been talking about here is something that I've been very focused on, which is security sector governance. And I think it gets to a little bit of what you're talking about. When we're working with countries, we need to make sure that we're working on infrastructure, but that we're also working on justice, making sure they are complying with international law, that they're taking care of their own citizens. I think that bringing those American values as well to our assistance is critically important. Would be happy to work with you and your team as we continue to look at ways to do this better and to expand our work across the world.
Thank you. And also, as we look forward to supplying Ukraine with defense aid, Do we have plans in place to ensure that as Russia encircles different areas, as the invasion continues, we still have supply lanes open to get that aid to our Ukrainian friends?
Thank you very much. We're looking absolutely hard at that. As the conflict continues, we want to ensure that all of the good material that they need is getting into their hands. So I can assure you that that's a real priority.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Bice is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the hearing today, and thank you for our witnesses. Like my colleagues on this committee, I have been closely monitoring Russia's ongoing unprovoked invasion of Ukraine over the past few days as it continues to worsen significantly overnight. Putin's widespread assault against an innocent country is an atrocious act which has jeopardized the stability of Europe and peace across the globe. I'm glad to see the U.S. imposed sanctions are starting to have real impacts on Russia as the ruble hit a record low and the key interest rates have more than doubled overnight. But more must be done. The Ukrainian people are fiercely defending their homeland, and we should take every action to ensure they have the tools needed to withstand this violent attack, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on the committee to do that very thing. A couple of things I want to throw out here. First of all, Ms. Lewis, can you talk about the State Department's efforts to help stem our allies' collective imports of Russian oil and gas?
First of all, thank you for the question. And again, wholeheartedly agree with your opening comments about what's happening inside Ukraine, particularly today. While I don't actually work on the question of oil and gas myself, I do know that the State Department, and in coordination with other departments, is working on that across the board and looking at a whole range of options there. I'm happy to take that back and provide you with more information.
Perfect, thank you. I want to follow up with, certainly regional partnerships are incredibly important, and to prevent Chinese aggression, what are we doing specifically to help in that area to stem the potential issue that we could be facing with Taiwan? Looking at countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, Australia, how are we working together with them to create some sort of partnership or alliance should China pose a threat to Taiwan in the future?
Thank you very much. It's an issue that absolutely we are profoundly concerned about. So there are a couple pieces. One piece, of course, is just our support to Taiwan, $18 billion since 2017 or so, and really helping ensure that the material they're buying is tied to the asymmetric approach that we think is probably best for them to take given the threat. With all of the countries you mentioned, we're putting forth a ton of effort to strengthen their military, its capacity, and its capability. We're looking hard at our force posture in Japan and Australia, those two that you cited. We've been making some good steps on that. So there's the bilateral piece, and then, of course, multilaterally, to the extent that we can try to tie East Asia tighter together with Australia. That's an important step. You had mentioned the Philippines, so I would say Southeast Asia as well, where, just to call out the Philippines for a moment, we're seeing some really positive progress on the human rights front with their military, which is pretty heartening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Escobar is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our witnesses for your work and for your testimony at this hearing. Our hearts are with the Ukrainian people who are literally fighting for their lives, their country, and their values, and who are living through a nightmare because of an unprovoked attack by Vladimir Putin. We have been horrified by the war crimes as well as the unfolding humanitarian crisis. I want to begin by expressing my immense gratitude to President Biden for doing the hard work of rebuilding critical alliances, for rallying NATO, ensuring that we had a strong coalition of support for Ukraine. After the prior administration alienated our allies and gave cover to our enemies, it was no doubt a difficult task to unite our friends once again. I'm proud that the United States currently has an administration committed to the transatlantic relationship and to leading the globe in defense of democracy with strength and integrity. I also, for our witnesses, I want to echo what my colleague, Representative Slotkin, mentioned in her advocacy for a different approach to letting countries into NATO. We need that different approach immediately, and we indeed need to meet this moment with urgency. I have the honor and privilege of representing El Paso, Texas, which is home to Fort Bliss, America's second largest military installation and largest joint mobilization force generation installation in the Army. The U.S. and her allies must continue to rally against the threats that we're seeing across the globe and work cohesively to deter and defend one another against aggression from adversaries. For Ms. Lewis, I want to kind of shift the focus a little bit more broadly. Many of the biggest purchasers of U.S. weapons, like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Turkey, the Philippines, also tend to be willing to violate human rights and disperse weapons to groups not friendly to the United States. I'd like to know, how are human rights factored into U.S. policies on arms sales and other forms of security assistance? And what is the State Department doing to strengthen its ability to evaluate risks in weapons transfers?
First of all, I also appreciate your opening comments on Ukraine and the serious situation that they are facing today. To turn to the question on human rights, and this is a critical question for us at the State Department. I think, as you know, the President has said that he wants to make human rights at the center of our foreign policy. And that means that when we work with partners, friends, and allies where there may be concerns about human rights, that I believe we both need to strengthen and deepen those relationships and at the same time raise those concerns. In terms of how we specifically work on human rights, you may be aware that we are currently working on the updates to our conventional arms transfer policy, which is the policy that governs across the interagency all of our work in this area. And I think when that does come out, you will see a renewed focus on human rights as part of that policy. So I think that's step one. In addition, in terms of the State Department, we really work hand in glove with our colleagues at the Bureau of the DRL Bureau, which is the bureau in charge of human rights, to make sure that as we look at these arms transfers, human rights is taken into account and considered. Finally, in addition, as we work with our partners in terms of our education, military education and training programs, we also have specific programs designed to help with civilian casualty mitigation. And then we work in conjunction with the whole wide range of programs from the State Department and USAID on human rights writ large.
Thank you. Dr. Karlin, I have a question for you, but I'm out of time. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.